My name is Todd, and I'd like to welcome you to the second episode of The Power of Five. During this series of videos, we will hear from 5 consultants from all around the world on topics related to leadership. Our intention is by sharing our advice and perspectives, we'll give you something new to think about, encourage you to find ways to apply those new thoughts to your own situations, and leave with real actionable steps to weave into your own leadership and culture. So today I'll be hosting, and we've got 4 of the panelists here. Welcome, everybody. So here's what I've got for you today. COVID has revealed challenges and opportunities associated with remote work teams. And the leaders that I work with are often asking, how do I create a culture when I can't call a quick huddle or when we aren't socializing with each other? And so much of that stuff happens in person. What tactics do you guys have that are going to help leaders create culture in those remote work environments? So I'd like to start with Joel. Joel, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, Todd, I think one of the things we need to be doing is maybe changing our paradigm on what work looks like and what culture building looks like. I think a lot of times we talk about water cooler conversations, we talk about team meetings, and we think that the only way we can build culture is through that. And I think what we've seen during COVID is that we can do work in a number of different ways. We're using tools like Slack and Teams and things like this, like Zoom, and being able to get together. And if anything, the connections can actually be stronger because we're more intentional about them. But I think too, what we need to be thinking about is how do we create those connections on a day-to-day basis? And build some of those routines in, because in many ways, that's what culture is, right? It's our traditions, it's our routines, it's the way we do business. And I think if we think about it with the old paradigm of that has to be face-to-face, that has to be in the same room, we miss an opportunity to actually transfer and even recreate, in some ways, our culture in the new world of work. I think it was Jason Fried that said that culture is the actions that people take. And so if we think about it from that perspective, whether it's from a leadership perspective or a team perspective, the actions that we take with each other during this time period is the way we're going to continue to create culture. And so being able to get on a call like this and kick around ideas or laugh or dig into a problem, that's part of our culture, right? And so I think we need to continue to change the way we think about it and adapt to this virtual world.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I'd actually said right at the beginning of my thought process was, I love the word you used, Joel, you said intentional. And I think that's the big difference. I think what we found is leaders, that's in my experience, they've been very reactionary. They've relied on just let's call a huddle. Let's interrupt everybody at a moment's notice. Let's rely on an accidental bumping into somebody, which has almost been quite a lazy and reactive way of leading. And what we're finding is why people are pushing back and saying, well, I can't build culture, is because we're asking our leaders to be more intentional. We're asking them to be planned. In terms of Stephen Covey, we're talking about it's important stuff, but it's not urgent. So we're in that sort of quadrant 2 kind of space instead of being in crisis and interruption. And I think my experience is that people have relied on that interruption connection, which is really, really not productive.
Mandy, it's interesting that you bring up Covey, because one of the things that sort of bubbles up in all this is this notion of building trust in a culture. And some of the things that I'm hearing is, those moments of trust can actually be built in those, knowing winks and those little coffee, moments and so on that may not show up in virtual. Catherine, Sean, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's funny that you just said trust, because the first thing that came to mind when you said it was you had to have had that trust culture before COVID. So if you didn't have that culture already of where you're hanging out and what do you think of this, and really open-minded and real feedback, honest feedback, you're not going to suddenly get it now, right? It had to have been developed before. And the other thing that I'll say that a couple of my clients have found effective is going back to what Joel and Mandy said, being intentional of actually planning to have fun, planning to have virtual coffees, planning that. And
Right.
what I've seen that works well is when you actually plan and make it a regular habit to do something weekly where
Mm,
number one, I think one of the best ideas was everybody's tired of Zoom. So let's do an old fashioned conference call. Do something different.
right.
Make sure it's fun. Make sure it's fun, but has a little bit of format. I had a client last week that said that they have these fun calls where they always lead with questions. So today it might be Catherine, next week it'll be Todd, kind of like what
Right.
we do.
Yep.
And the questions are sometimes just, hey, what's something cool that you're reading or watching? Or
Right.
one that I really liked was and this was from a client from a couple weeks ago, if money was no object, what's the craziest thing we should do here? But I think to have those scheduled, even if they're 15 minutes, and like Joel and Mandy said, to be intentional with it.
Right. Yeah, it's good. Catherine, what do you think?
Well, thank you for laying a buffet of things that I want to comment on now. Everybody.
You're welcome.
So
That's what we're here for.
So to start off with, in the blue corner, Joel, when he talked about, the companies who are doing it well are continuing to do it well. And those of the companies that were kind of like, we don't know how to build culture when we're not doing it the old fashioned way, made me think of last week, kind of exploring who are those companies around the world who've actually been 100% remote companies for the last number of years. And there's a whole bunch of them, right? There are rating systems for 100% remote companies. And the interesting thing when I just kind of Googled the list and I started looking at quotes from these companies and their value systems, and every single one of them had things like, you do whatever you want when you want. It's about outcomes, not the time in the chair. We have reallocated all of our like really big spend, as opposed to traveling around for meetings and all this stuff, to twice a year we get together and we have a blowout and we don't even talk business. Like we just get together as human beings. We have a good time. Even as leaders, they say, I'm available for you, but I'm not going to be checking in on you all the time. So I trust. I've set really clear rules of engagement. I've set really clear outcomes that we're looking for. I trust you to do your work, but I'm always available. I'm always accessible. And the component of trust is inherent in all of that working, right? Because
Right.
you're not actually going to just say, hey, Joel, talk to you next Monday. Good luck. And I don't care what you do and how you do it in the meantime. I trust that you're going to be doing your work, that I hired you to bring all of that amazing potential to the fore, and that if you need me, you can reach me. And then that other part about very intentional, they do human stuff. So when they do these kinds of things, it's not always about the work stuff. They get together and they do a games thing, or they do, like you were suggesting, Sean, something fun, but they think about what do I do with other people not in my workspace to deepen relationships. And that's what culture is all about.
Right. And some of that's going to be one-on-one, I would imagine, as well, right? Like, so for example, all of us have clients who are now onboarding new people. And so the orientation process is going to be a little bit different. And so you're trying to introduce them to the culture. And these people don't know anybody in office. Maybe they have an opportunity to, get everyone together and say hi and so on. How does that change, or does it change when we do this virtually? What's everyone think?
Yeah, I think it does change. I had a client, we were talking about the fact that some of the data is showing that younger people have struggled more in this sort of remote scenario, and we're trying to work out why. And I think one of the reasons is that as you wander the floors and wander the hallways and everything to go meet people. But again, it comes back to having to be more intentional. So, you know, I know something that I've spoken about for years is draw a stakeholder map, work out the critical stakeholders that you need to deal with, and actually go and intentionally build trust with them. You're only going to do that by having a conversation. Pick up the phone. You know, as Sean said, doesn't all have to be about Zoom. But, you know, so you can actually pick up the phone and say, hey, I'm new. I'm just reaching out to say hi, rather than just relying on this accidental water cooler bumping into each other thing, which takes so much time. So what we can actually do is start speeding trust and speeding the building of culture. And I find it fascinating that people are going, oh, no, what's going to happen about our culture? There are actually very few organizations that could actually say their culture was brilliant. So why do we want to go back? Let's keep moving forward and strengthening it.
I think one of the other issues that we...
Go ahead, Joel.
Sorry. Go ahead, Joel. Yeah, go ahead.
I think one of the other issues that we see in the midst of this is, you know, the chaos of COVID and virtual work and all that. And companies spent a lot of time on process, right? Like, okay, if we're going to bring in new employees, how do we make sure they get what they need and the, you know, their computers and all this other stuff? And I think we've done an okay job with communicating the process, but we're not creating opportunities for people to get those connections. You know, it's my first day on the job and all the people that I meet and the awkward interactions and realizing that I went to school with somebody that works right across from me and all those types of things. I think that's where companies need to be thinking if we are moving to a new way of doing work, more virtual. You know, when we talk about that intentionality, it is this, how do I meet Todd one-on-one, right? Todd would have been somebody that sat across from me. Now he's, you know, half a city away. How do I do that, right? And so thinking more of those one-on-one data points or those connection points versus just what's my 10-step process for creating an invoice or jumping on Zoom or Slack or any of those types of things. Is really about, no, how do I connect with Mandy, right? And get to know Mandy. And there is going to have to be a one-on-one component of that.
Yeah. Sean, what were you thinking?
I was going to say, culture is not what we say it is. It's what we do and how we show up. And it's not what's on the wall. And I've got a client that's it's a very fun culture. And we had a meeting maybe 6 weeks ago, Zoom meeting. And there were 2 new hires on the meeting. And I said, is anything different because the 2 new hires? And they're like, no, the show goes on. And the lead of the division, the head of that division, showed up at the beginning of this meeting with Fizbo the clown from Modern Family as his backdrop. And he had that crazy nose. And then he shot it over to one of his colleagues that did some other goofy stuff. And I was like, in the first minute or 30 seconds virtually, those new hires were like, oh, this is pretty fun culture.
Sure. Yeah, you know, and you guys are saying some really interesting things about the fact that, you know, it's intentional and you have to create it, and there's some good orientation that, you know, you can connect with people. And I guess we used to do this back in the day, right? Like there used to be this pen pal thing, right? Where you'd be writing letters back and forth to people you never knew, but somehow you'd build a relationship with them by doing that. You know, so is there a trick, or what's the tips in here that we can be, you know, digging into that people can be using?
Well, I think it comes back to the intentionality, and it comes back to human-centered, you know, whether it's human-centered leadership, human-centered culture development and implementation. So, you know, intentionally think about, well, how can I have some fun? I mean, putting up a clown in the background is a very intentional choice, and it's can be perceived as kind of vulnerable and risky because it might not be seen. I mean, it's seen as normal in this group, but not in all organizations. But I had a great conversation with a leader the other day who, in the midst of COVID, they went through a huge organizational reorg, and she moved into a new leader. She was leading a new team. And so I had to develop this sort of trust as a new leader. And she said, I didn't know what to do. And I thought she came up with something really fun. She said, we're going to do, and I can't remember if she called it Wheel of Fortune or Jeopardy or whatever, but she came up with all these questions about the kind of leader that she was. And of course it was silly, like, you know, multiple choice. A, you guys can do whatever you want when you want, and I'll be out, you know, eating Cheetos in the back. Or B, I'm a tyrant. Or C. So she came up with all these really silly things. To your point, Sean, within a minute, they were all laughing, they were sharing, they were joking around. But that was very intentional. And actually, quite a specific effort that she put a lot of time and energy into to want to ensure that she could show up in accordance with what she probably would describe as the characteristics of the leadership traits that she wants to embody, right? So
Yeah, and I think that the key is it's just be yourself. Like if you're fun and goofy in person, then be fun and goofy on video. And I think sometimes people get weird when it's like, it's video. It's better like, oh, I better be serious. Or like be yourself. Doesn't matter what the delivery is, just be yourself.
Right. Now, does anyone have any tips? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Mandy.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I think we've, I'm very mindful also of not overemphasizing just the fun part either. I think there's a lot of people that have gone through a lot of pain. So there was a young woman we were talking about, so we've done a retest on some diagnostic data, and we're doing a sort of a debrief of where we're at. And it was really fascinating. You could tell she was quite hurt by some of the feedback from her colleagues, but when we dug deeper, she could understand it because she'd been going through so much herself. She has 2 young children. She had gone through a divorce, and so she was trying to homeschool these kids, sell a house, and go through a divorce, and wasn't communicating well enough with her colleagues. So she would just say, no, can't do it. And I said to her, can you understand? And her colleagues were seeing her as secretive and not participative and not being part of the team. And I said, imagine if you'd said, would love to help. I'm really struggling right now. This is what I'm going through. I said, you have to be real. So you have to actually share with people what's happening for you so people can empathize and get in your shoes. So I think I love the element of fun. And I think there's also, we have to make space for some people are really going through a really tough time, and they need to be able to share that. We need to make it okay as a leader for them to share that and not be seen as being weak and not coping.
Yeah, it really underpins that notion about being yourself, right? Be real, be transparent, be yourself. You don't have to put on a facade for the cameras, as it was. So, you guys have given some really good tips on, so if I was going to be building trust between one-on-one, Joel and I, we're connecting, we're on the phone, we're doing that. Maybe we're doing it as a team, the 5 of us, we've got a bit of a rhythm going. Do the same rules apply when we look across the whole organization, trying to create an organizational culture, and we happen to be, divided among a couple of continents and a couple of time zones and so on? Do the same rules apply, or do you see that some of that may change up?
I personally see the same rules applying.
Me
Absolutely.
too.
Right.
There's been a client I'm currently working with, and she's just taken on a new team. They're being perceived as silos, and one of the things she wants us to focus on is the first team concept, which comes from Patrick Lencioni. And it's like, well, it doesn't matter what your team downwards is. We need you to be strong this way with your colleagues, and we need to have each other's backs, and we need to be completely aligned, because if we're not doing that, then our teams will work in silos. So yeah, I think it's critical. Sorry, Catherine, I cut you off there. So
you said exactly what I was going to say. So thank you.
Right. Yeah, Joel, what do you think?
Well, I would agree. I think the one thing that I would be considering from the team standpoint and jumping up to the organization is, I think that intentionality looks different, right? With your team, there's probably going to be a much quicker rhythm. Maybe it's a weekly rhythm, or maybe in some cases a daily rhythm. From an organization standpoint, there's probably not going to be a check-in or some sort of a connection point every week. But especially now, if a company was on kind of a quarterly schedule, I think it makes a lot of sense for them to kind of move down a notch, right? And at least move to monthly. And I think there's been some great companies who have done, whether it be by email or video conference or whatever, just talking about what's changing the organization, or in some ways confronting the awkwardness, right? Hey, you all used to work here. We used to see each other. Now we're completely dispersed around the globe, and that's been tough, right? But here's what we're doing as an organization to make sure that we stay on track, or that our culture doesn't, dissipate. And I think being intentional there, but understanding that probably going to be some pace changes that we need is important, because I think if we're just thinking about the team or trying to duplicate what's happening on the team, it's going to feel out of place.
Right.
And just having
Right.
those
Adaptable.
conversations.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, just
Sorry, say
like,
that again, Catherine?
I was just saying that to be transparent about articulating that, right? We don't have to hide
Yeah.
why we're having these conversations. And I do think it comes down to having conversations with individuals and other groups of individuals. But it's just being really honest and transparent and like, hey guys, so we're in this together. This is what we're thinking of doing. How can we do this? What are the barriers? What can we do? How are you feeling right now? Just, again, it goes back to that human-centered leadership, right? Whether it's personal leadership as a member of a team or whether it's functional leadership. I think that's really a critical piece. Sorry, Sean.
Yeah. Sean, you had final thoughts? We're just wrapping up here, guys. So last thoughts here?
If you haven't seen episode 1 of The Power of 5, we talked about this then. You might want to go back if you haven't seen it. But
click and subscribe. Click and subscribe.
Right below, yeah. But things change one conversation at a time. And exactly to your point, Mandy, about the empathy and really listening to people. We've had people break down but if we didn't have the culture of those real conversations before, and I think that's the key, and being able to have those real conversations. This community here, we're in 5 different locations, and I've had some pretty in-depth conversations with each and every one of you via Zoom. So I think sometimes we get weirded out by the delivery method, but it's the connection that matters.
Yeah, no, that's great. Good point. Listen, guys, fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing all of your tips and your tricks and your thoughts on this topic. And for everyone who's watching, thank you very much for joining us today. Listen, if you found this useful, please keep an eye out for future episodes where we'll continue to examine what it takes to be an effective leader. Thanks very much for joining us on Power of 5.
See you guys.